Coming up on today's show.
I've seen far too many futurists and even more broadly coming into organizations, consultants generally. Hey, I'm the expert. You got to listen to me. And I've seen it from the other side where I've been with clients and they'll, after the consultants out of the room and say, well, that's that's BS. That's not going to work here. That, you get all of the typical resistance. And the consultant has basically lost the client right from the start. I mean, you need to come across certainly as professional in knowing what you're doing, but you can't come across as I know it all and you don't. A great deal of humility is actually required in that.
Welcome to the Think Forward Show. I'm your host, Steve Fisher. Today, I've got a really special guest, futurist, educator, and storyteller, Peter von Stackelberg. If you've ever seen that epic layered timeline of cycles and trends floating around the foresight world, well, that's Peter's work. He's also one of the pioneers of narrative foresight and transmedia story worlds, showing how stories can move people to act where data alone falls flat. In this episode, we talk about his journey from investigative journalism to future studies at the University of Houston. We dive into his idea of exploratory forecasts and why timeframes actually matter. We explore story worlds and even AI that can make the future more tangible and human. It's a fascinating conversation about cycles, storytelling, and the craft of helping people imagine what's next. But before we get going, I'd like to ask a small favor for you to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast player. It really means a lot. Okay, let's get going. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hello, good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I've been following your work for a long time. Big fan of the, we'll talk about the big, the project of cycles and that kind of epic piece of work that you've become known for. But for those who don't know you, why don't you share your journey, your background, and what you're doing these days?
It's been a rather interesting journey, particularly as I look back at it. Journalist, worked in the organizational training and development field. I did business process reengineering. I got a master's degree in studies of the future at the University of Houston, Clear Lake along the way.
Uh-huh.
Worked for a while professionally, strictly as a futurist, particularly with a focus on technology forecasting and foresight. Then went back, got a master's degree in information design and technology. And that sort of got me back to what I've always been interested in, that's writing and storytelling and so on. With that, I developed a master's thesis that, in terms of its length, I think it kind of shocked my advisor. In 6 months, I wrote 300 pages of a master's thesis.
Oh my.
So I take that as inspiration that drove that. And that was back in 2010. For the last 15 years, I've become increasingly intrigued and involved in storytelling, story structures, application of storytelling to a wide variety of things. My background in future studies is always embedded in what I'm doing. I've just retired from 20 years of teaching at the university level, undergraduate courses, some on tech forecasting, more recently media studies, technology, and the future of communication, the use of AI in storytelling and creative work, and so on. So, although it seems like my career has been all over the place, and sometimes it does feel like that, there's a sort of a central core, and that's communication. It's talking about things that I think are important. And I went into the Futures program back in the early 90s with that interest in communication, and the Future Studies program just basically added that component to what I've been doing pretty much for my entire career.
So that is quite a journey. I've done the Houston Masters as well. Yours was at Clear Lake in the earlier days of the program. What motivated you to seek out a program like that? Did you know about futures and foresight how early before that? Because obviously you would have to kind of search that out. How did you kind of come to know about this as a say a field, a space, a workspace, a tool set? How did you come to discover that?
Well, it's part of a love story, believe it or not.
That's why we're here. Let's do it.
I first got interested in future studies when I was in my undergraduate journalism program up in Toronto back in the early 70s, and we needed to do a society and media presentation. And there was this guy called Toffler that I read a book, that he'd written. I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. So I did a presentation on that, and I remember using, at that time it was literally slides on a projector or overheads, and I was playing the song in the year 2525, and that was quite a while ago. And basically, I'd been hooked on the idea of the future and looking at it. It wasn't until 1989, 1990, I'd met a gal in Houston. We started dating, and at one point she says, "Hey, there's this program you might be interested in." And she'd taken a number of courses in it. I said, "Oh, okay." So I went over to the university at Clear Lake and checked it out and said, "Yeah, this looks kind of interesting." And before you know it, I was pursuing a master's degree in future studies. And I just kind of loved it. It's a love story in more than one dimension.
That's great. For those who are listeners of the show,
I married the gal.
Go ahead. Oh, you did? I was about to kind of lead into like, whatever happened with that? So
yeah,
you did.
I did.
So your futurist picked a preferred future in that way. Yes. It's just great. Yeah. Absolutely. You're living your preferred future.
Definitely. And so when I talk about future stuff, she actually understands it.
Well, that's good. I have the same. I'm very blessed with my wife is also my writing partner and business partner, life partner, the whole thing. And she is doing this kind of work as well as a behavioral scientist. So at least, we have great conversations. So it's good to have somebody that you can kind of talk the language with.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's funny, those who listen to the show know that Future Shock was a book I read when I was 13 in like 1985. So it had a profound impact on me, and just realizing you could do this as a job, which I didn't pursue. I had obviously other interests at as a teenager.
Yeah.
But, that and Third Wave and, his work really kind of set the kind of core philosophy for me as a futurist and kind of the foundational aspects of my work. Did you ever have him come in? Did you ever meet him or work with him on any projects?
No, never did.
Never did?
No.
I mean, he's someone I would love to have over to dinner sometime. Well, you've worked with, your client list is like a Fortune 500 Hall of Fame. You've worked with Shell, which is obviously, storied for the scenarios work they did, but like Exxon, Honda, you've worked with so many groups. But, when you're sitting, when you work with with companies like this and organizations, massive organizations, you're the person saying, everything you know about it's probably wrong. So how do you address, I like to talk about uncomfortable truths or, asking the wrong questions. How do you get people to work through their work through a mindset to work on possible futures and do this kind of work together collaboratively?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Okay, a quick pause from the show. Are you preparing for the future or just hoping it doesn't catch you off guard? My new book, Super Shifts, is your guide to navigating the biggest transformations of our time: AI, automation, and the new world of work. And here's the deal. If you pre-order or grab your copy now, you'll get exclusive bonus content, including the behind-the-scenes look at what didn't make the final book. Stay tuned after the episode for details, but don't wait. Head to supershiftsbook.com and get your copy today. Now back to the show.
Well, I think I had an advantage probably over a lot of other folks in that by the time I got into futures studies professionally, I'd had probably 25 years of experience as a investigative journalist and asking tough questions, doing it in a way that often people didn't feel threatened, even though I was asking the tough questions. And I don't know that I can explain the technique in detail, but basically what I would do is I'd have a conversation. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't it certainly wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation. I tended to, and I still do, tend to listen more than I talk. So when I'm doing an interview like this, it's kind of a flip situation. It's a little of the strange side.
I think it's one of the superpowers of a futurist is listening. Yeah, you have to kind of almost have to kind of recede into the background and let other people, especially if you're in a workshop or a collaborative space, is let them do what they do, kind of bring those things out instead of trying to, force the things in a certain direction. I think that's one of the most biggest, and being a journalist, that's one of your gifts, being able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the process, well, not just the process, the entire function, I think, of being a futurist. Others prefer the term foresight, others prefer who knows what. But basically, getting people to look at their future or futures involves having them comfortable, not challenging them, certainly not challenging them right off the start. The ability to sit back and just listen and fade into the background, I think, is really important. And I learned that, again, as a journalist, where you become part of the landscape, and it's amazing things people will say.
Yeah, it's true.
The work as a futurist, you also need to have the mindset that it's a process of discovery. Not just for you as the consultant to be internal or external, but it's a process of discovery for the people you're talking with. They need to discover things on their own. Point blank saying, hey, you need to do this is probably not going to penetrate the initial resistance. So you need to be able to gently lead them to discover things that are important as it relates to them and their future. That may be different mindsets. That may mean different tactics and strategies. That may mean any number of things. It may mean simply being aware of, hey, here's a new technology. What's it going to do? How it's going to upset the products or services that you provide. How you go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's how you approach them in that process of discovery, I think, that's critical. I've seen far too many futurists, and even more broadly, coming into organizations, consultants generally. Hey, I'm the expert. You got to listen to me. And I've seen it from the other side where I've been with clients and they'll, after the consultant's out of the room, and say, well, that's that's BS. That's not going to work here. That, you get all of the typical resistance. And the consultant has basically lost the client right from the start. I mean, you need to come across certainly as professional in knowing what you're doing, know what you're doing, but you can't come across as I know it all and you don't. Great deal of humility is actually required in that.
Yeah, that is a trait that sometimes doesn't exist in the consulting space. I can speak firsthand about that. And it's challenging because it's also the easier target to blame the consultant.
Sure.
And when you have, I would say, views that are, there's a resistance to change. You've mentioned, I listened to one of the interviews you've done that, like excellent, powerful forecasts and scenarios, they all then end up sitting on a shelf. I like to say put in a drawer, right?
Uh-huh.
Despite having really great data, I would say that's as a futurist, that's the eternal frustration, right? It's like, what do you think is the psychology behind why people are so resistant to acting on it when they probably know it's like accurate? Why do you think it's that, when you probe, like, what do you think?
Generally, people are loath to change. Think for a variety of reasons, and it's as simple as complex as that. It could be, if I change this now, something that's been working for years, change it for something isn't going to work, in the future. I'm afraid that things are going to change and I'm going to lose my relevance, or I simply don't like the direction this is going and therefore I'm not going to accept any of it. And, to give you an up-to-date example, of the latter one in particular. But really, I think it comes down to fear. It comes down to feeling threatened. And that's the reaction of many writers to the emergence of generative AI. If you get online in the writers groups, which I follow just to see what's going on, and occasionally I pipe up. I mean, I have opinions, so they need to be shared from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fiercest resistance comes from those who, for whatever reason, are afraid of what the technology will do. And we see that come out in a variety of statements like AI-generated stories have no soul. Well, yeah, totally agree. And, my perspective is that's why you have a human writer involved in the loop. It's to put that soul in. Well, the quality is not the greatest. It's generic when you generate stuff using AI. Well, yeah, that's true too. Again, that's why you have a talented writer in the group or in the loop. So there are a multitude of excuses, and I've seen just stubborn resistance to trying to talk about any of it because there's this underlying fear, and I'm not sure, from case to case what the exact cause is, but I think part of it's insecurity in somebody's own knowledge and abilities. Some of it's fear that, hey, this is going to take my work away from me. Some of it is, I just don't understand this stuff. Some people are resistant to learning, and I've seen that time and time again with students. There are some who love to learn and others who just don't want to learn because it takes effort, it takes energy, it takes focus. Learning is not what they want to focus on. So, why is there resistance to change? Why do you face that as a futurist? Any and all of those, probably in a whole lot.
Is this why you pivoted toward storytelling as a communication tool? Because we want to talk about transmedia storytelling, but that is, as a journalist, you have a narrative always when you report on something too.
Yep. Yeah, the reason I've pivoted to storytelling, and that doesn't mean I've abandoned looking at the future, it just means I'm using a different set of tools. And the reason for that is I've seen far too many futures consultants come in with all the data. And I did that myself in the early days. Hey, there's all this great data. We've got it nailed down. The trends are really solid. Boom, boom, blah, blah, blah. And client will say, oh, yeah, cool. Okay. And then, as you say, put it in a drawer, put it on the shelf, and merrily go about their business. While I was going through the master's program in information design, I ran across a concept called the data information knowledge wisdom spectrum, developed by a fellow by the name of Nathan Shedroff. And it looks at the progression of data to information, to knowledge, to wisdom, and the components that are involved in that. And it became pretty clear very early on as I was looking at that and looking at other aspects of storytelling is that the story was really the way of getting to people and getting to really move from that data perspective to knowledge and wisdom. A key component of developing knowledge and wisdom is context. It's experience, shared, individual, whatever. It's the sharing of experiences. A data dump doesn't share experiences.
Right.
And to give you a very precise example that I've used time and time again in my classes on writing, not futures classes, but writing classes, is to say, okay, I'll throw a number out and I'll say 3 meters. And students will just look at me and I'll say, okay, that's a data point. 3 meters in sea level rise. Okay, now you've got some context, but first off, they don't know, American students, they don't know what 3 meters really is. So I'll say floor to ceiling, that's about 3 meters. That's how much the sea is going to rise. Okay, now they're starting to get it. They start to suddenly understand, that 3 meters is just not some sort of foreign alien number to them, but it's actually got a particular context, it's got particular meaning, and they can see it. They can feel it. Then I'll ask, okay, how many of you are from, a coastal area? And a lot of them put their hands up, and I say, okay, imagine you're standing at the seashore right at the water's edge. And, 50 years from now, the water's going to be 3 meters above your feet. So you're going to be under the water. What's that going to do to your neighborhood? What's that going to do where you grew up? What's that going to do for the lives that you've led and the lives moving forward? And those of not just you, but your friends, your neighbors, all of that. And they start to, in a much more visceral way, start to understand what 3 meters means. It's not just a number. It's not just a data point. It's something that they can start to feel emotionally. It goes beyond the intellect. And that's one of the most powerful things about stories is if you're doing them right, you're evolving emotion. And humans learn through emotion. Strong emotions can drive learning. And that's been well demonstrated.
Do you find that, I would say this is your story world's concept, correct? Like this is what you're getting into. Yeah. Cause it's that walk a mile in someone's shoes. It's the immersion into a world. It's one thing to build it or put things around it or the objects or the settings, but to immerse the empathy layers that go into, world building could be a term, but, just like you said, story worlds. Where do you take that for people that are new to futures? Do you find that as an entry point for people to get into the conversation?
I actually hadn't really thought about it in that way, but yeah, I think certainly I would encourage anybody who's in the futures field right now, and particularly anybody who's just entering it, to become expert storytellers.
I couldn't agree more.
You need to be able to do all the other stuff. You need to know the different futures tools. You need to know how to do quantitative and qualitative analysis. You need to do the research. But to make all of that of real value, you need to be able to turn that into a story, and a story that connects with the people you're telling the story to. So you need to understand your audience. What are their concerns? What drives them? What are they worried about? All of those things. And you need to be able to come up with a story that genuinely moves them. It could be emotionally, it could move them to start thinking about things. It should be something that they take away and it keeps coming back to them. Having people think in futures terms is not a, hey, here's a workshop and away you go and now you're going to do it.
Right.
It becomes... It's essential to embed that process of futures thinking into what people do on a day-to-day basis to the point where it's instinctive.
Well, I've also noticed in your story world or story world time type of is the kind of temporal framework that you use. You can look at horizons, 5, 10, 20 or those, but yours is a bit different. It's almost like a time machine for ideas type of thing. Could you unpack the kind of the temporal framework a bit? Is it, you kind of alluded to, you've kind of explained parts of it, I think, but there's a kind of flexibility when you communicate things.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're a podcast host or someone wanting to be interviewed on podcasts as a guest, visit podmatch.com. Podmatch automatically connects ideal podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. We always say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. Podmatch has connected over 85,000 guests and hosts together for interviews that listeners love, all while saving you countless hours of administrative work through built-in automations. If you're ready to level up your podcast interviews on either side of the mic, start today by visiting podmatch.com.
Yeah, the one of the things that had irritated and continues to irritate me when I'm talking with some futurists is futurists don't make predictions.
Speaking my language, brother. Yes, we don't predict the future. We look at possible futures, right? That's the crux of it all.
And I sort of want to go, I mean, okay, I understand conceptually. However, the people...
You must love the prediction posts at the beginning in January of every year. You must love that.
Those drive me crazy.
I know.
But the other side, too, is futurists who say, we don't predict anything. We just lay out the possibilities. And the reason that bothers me, and again, conceptually, I understand that. Practically, though, most folks, they can't deal with that. They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I always say, see if this resonates with you. Like I always say to people, the future, one of the possible futures will become the present. Isn't it better to know which one it's going to be? So you're better prepared. Like, you know what I mean? So you can navigate it. I mean, to me, that's the essence of, like, you know, when people ask what I do, I say I'm a futurist. I talk about being a designer, but I said with a futurist, I said and they're like, some people don't know what it is. I said, I do long-term strategic planning beyond the year or two. I help people understand the long-term strategy. And that usually kind of stems the conversation. They might want to know more, but I find that, futurist is a term some know, some don't know. And those that know, it's like 50 different flavors of it. Right. So yeah, it's good when you say that.
The other thing that I find in terms of futurists professionally often are hesitant to say, hey, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame or roughly a 10-year time frame or longer than that. And my frustration comes from folks in the business apparently not understanding that the client needs something more than sometime in the future this is going to happen or this might happen. I mean, yeah, okay, I've got to make some decisions for my organization. Mm-hmm. It does actually make a difference if it's happening 5 years from now versus 50 years from now. Timeframes do shape decisions, and without solid timeframes, it's difficult to make informed decisions. Yeah. So can things change? Can things not pan out in terms of, hey, I said 20 years from now we're going to see this, and well, maybe it's going to be 25 instead, or maybe it's 15. A number of years ago, I came up with the concept of what I call the exploratory forecast. Typically, and these are the ones that, like you mentioned, the beginning of the year, here's the future for 2026 at this point. Exactly. It's going to be this, 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 and this. I'm going, okay, seen this before, we'll see. The way I prefer to do it is we've got an exploratory forecast. I'll put something out there. Hey, this I think is going to happen in the next 5 years based on these factors. But there's always a degree of uncertainty. And I use the analogy of an unguided rocket that you aim and fire, and then it just goes on its way, versus a guided missile, which you fire, and then it corrects its track as it's tracking the target. An exploratory forecast basically is a guided process for determining whether or not the event that you thought was going to happen, that you forecast as happening at such and such a point, is actually going to happen. So there are indicators along the way that you can start to track that say we're on track or we're not on track. And if you're off track, do you need to adjust something? If the exploratory forecast is completely invalid, then as a futurist, you say, okay, it's invalid. We thought it was right, but it's not. So let's see what we do now. As opposed to what I see a lot of, forecasting experts, they'll do a one-shot, hey, I expect this, and then they're busily trying to defend their forecasts as being accurate 99 or 100% of the time. And oh, by the way, I did kind of forget the ones that missed the target.
Yeah, there's a forced function fit in that really invalidates quickly the quality of the perspective and then the credibility of the person doing it. And it puts people who do this kind of work in a challenging position, but it's a cautionary tale too, right? And I think more people should understand, what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, are you going to be 100% accurate in your forecasts? If somebody claims that, I'm going, okay, wait a minute. Let me actually see what you're doing. Are you making forecasts that are sort of of course, that anybody can make? Are you hiding the results of forecasts that didn't pan out so you can say, hey, I got 100%? It's, that scorecard is, from my perspective, baloney.
I've always said there's three jobs you can be wrong 90% of the time. That's weatherman, venture capitalist, and futurist. And still keep your job.
Yeah.
But there's humility in that. You have to own up that you got that one wrong. And I think a lot of people have challenges with that. I think that's where it comes.
Absolutely. And I think the sort of consummate professional in the futures field is one that really understands the various methodologies, deeply understands systems theory, systems thinking, chaos and complexity theory, but also says quite freely, yeah, I kind of missed on that one. Now let's go back and see why I missed. What is there something I missed? Is my methodology flawed? You start to tear apart the methods that you've used, and then, okay, the methodology seems to be solid. Is there something, a variable that I missed? Looking at this, well, what was that variable? How important is it? You got the variables right, but hey, the world's full of random events. The world is chaotic. Things change. Therefore, you go with the guided missile approach as to the fire and forget rock. And, it's really as simple as that.
There's a few things in storytelling before I wanted to get to the timeline projects, but the transmedia as a term, it was like everywhere probably about 10 years ago. Because people were looking at different channels, you could call it, there was omni-channel marketing, but transmedia, how would you define, for those who maybe have never even heard the term before, and where the state of it is today is, because it doesn't seem to be mentioned anymore in a lot of places. It used to be, especially in advertising, marketing. How would you define transmedia in a current state, because we have so many new kinds of tools and approaches?
Yeah, basically my definition of this comes straight out of my master's thesis 15 years ago, which is at about the point just before transmedia took off as a buzzword.
Yeah.
Is that transmedia narratives are one or more stories told across two or more media platforms. So I've got one story that's told in a comic book and a television series, or it's a novel and it's a film. And it's not just an adaptation of a book to a film. It's a different story in the book from in the film, but set in the same story world, maybe with the same characters, maybe with different characters, but the story world itself is the unifying component. We see transmedia stuff around us all the time.
Yes.
We just don't hear the term anymore because it's essentially become absorbed in the thinking that particularly media companies are involved in. Anybody ever heard of Star Wars? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say Star Wars.
The Marvel Universe. Anybody know
Marvel?
that?
Yeah, MCU. Yep, exactly.
Are those
another one? Yeah, are they? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. TV, the one that always comes to my mind, I mean, obviously Star Wars is the earliest one, but I mean, they were strictly movies, but then they had the extended universe, the books, all the different, built world, universe building more than just worlds. But I think of the Matrix movies. There's 3 of them. Obviously, the first one was huge, and then the second and third one came out close. There was a video game that there's a scene where I think it's in the second movie where Jada Pinkett Smith comes in, they're all meeting together. Those who've seen the movie, like all the kind of rebellion people, they're meeting in the Matrix in like this room, and they come in from something else. There's a whole video game that connects to where they come from and what their mission or kind of side quest or kind of thing, and that's a whole game. But it tells part of the story, but it's in a video game format versus a movie, right? And then you've got shorts or other types of animated shorts. Blade Runner's done this with 2049. They had other things, So yeah, it is. It's interesting. You're heading it like it's become so commonplace. You don't have to call it out as transmedia. Transmedia is the way of telling stories with media. It's just the way it is right now.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm talking with folks, particularly in the film and television industry, and I'll talk about a story universe, they get it. I mean, they get it right now.
Well, you're in the world. You're part of the World Building Institute, and I know you've done some papers with Alex McDowell, who worked on Minority Report, and you work around those. I mean, students and clients are they're trying to do this. Do you kind of have them start from scratch? Like, where do they start? Because it's one thing to kind of have something established or the incubation of something. How do they go from nothing? Like, what's the first kind of steps? Like kind of a worksheet to kind of start the framing? Like how does somebody start with it?
Well, the start of the process is pretty standard future stuff. Get to know your client. What are the issues? All of that stuff. That doesn't change. What changes or should change is, okay, instead of doing a 4-box scenario, which lots of folks still do, let's do something a little bit different. Or we're going to look at causal layered analysis. Okay, that's a good place to start. That's a methodology, though. That's not a way of building a story universe, but that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're looking at with building a story world from the futurist perspective is, what are the key things that we need to know? What's the world going to look like in the future? And you build that world holistically around that. And then you inject characters into it. You inject interactions, social interactions, economic, political interactions into that and see how they play out in that particular universe that you've developed. What are the factors that are important? What does this story tell me from a character who is developing a startup and suddenly AI is on the scene? What's that mean to them? How potentially can they react? What happens, the events, what happens to them psychologically, emotionally? Because remember, you're also trying to touch the audience, your client, not just at the intellectual level, but at the emotional level so that it sticks. Are they able to identify in some way with the characters that you've got? Do they see their lives, their problems, their workplaces, that kind of stuff reflected in it? And quite frankly, that's hard to do from a professional perspective. I mean, I can say here, and here's what you do, but when you're doing it in practice, it's not just, hey, this on the checklist, this on the checklist. Yep, I hit that, and we're done. You really need to be able to start to understand how you can reach the people that you're trying to work with. You may understand that there's a looming threat coming, but for various reasons they don't. Certainly you can scare the hell out of them, but, and that's a very strong emotion, but that's not likely to get them to change. It's likely to actually push them off. So you get a character that says, hey, I've got this looming threat. It's a big one. How do I react? I tried this and it failed. I tried that and it failed. There's this obstacle, that obstacle. But here's how the character overcame them. And you're basically doing a journey from the present to the future while also doing a journey in which the character solves fundamental problems. And at the same time, probably has some internal changes of perspective.
Well, and one of the projects I wanted to kind of shift into as a kind of toward the wrapping up this episode is that one of the things that I actually got introduced to you is the timeline of major trends and events. Like I will call it mega layered timeline. That's the kind of quantitative data like foundation, when you're doing these, the world building and the story worlds, they can give you kind of at least a starting point to go from. Where did that idea come from? And, it's obviously how has it played out? Like in the last 50, is it, what's gone? Or like, I got that on and, but where did it where did the project idea start?
It started in a quantitative futures class at Clear Lake in around 1992.
Okay.
I was running a bunch of charts on a Excel spreadsheet or whatever the heck the spreadsheets were back then.
I think we're safe with Excel at that word.
Yeah,
maybe
probably.
VisiCalc, who knows?
So I'm generating these charts, and at one point I'm going, what the heck? I got this chart, and I got that chart, and I got another chart, and I can't make sense of them because they're all tacked on my wall separately.
Yeah.
Maybe I ought to put them on a common timeline. So let's use time as the horizontal axis, and we'll just stack the different trends up and see what's what. And it started.
For people who have never seen it, which one you have it? What do you have? Just a sampling. Just what do you have in there? I'm going to leave a link to the paper in the show notes so people can look at it and see it. It's amazing. But what are the? Yeah.
Give me a second to grab my copy here.
Yeah.
And this is the one from 1998, looking rather faded, by the way. But that's the first published one. I actually started doing these in 93, 94.
Mm-hmm.
But then I went, hey, this is kind of cool. So I got 100 of them printed out, and they include basically the steep categories: political, economic, technological, social, environmental, macro bands. Environmental, for example, it's got CO2 levels, it's got sunspot activity, it's got world population growth, stuff like that. The focus on most of this is American, and that's just because the data sets were easily available. And I never have gone far beyond the American aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I've moved on to other things, but two, maybe somebody else ought to do that who actually knows their reach in their country. I don't mind them using the approach at all. I don't want to, as a Canadian American, say, though, hey, I know all of this about you guys, when there may be something different. Europe and Asia, wherever. So we've got the technological events and the economic events. One of the key things that I've built in, and it's evolved over time, but the basics are still there, is the K-wave.
Yeah, the Kondratiev is Kondratiev, right? Kondratiev.
Yeah,
I can never pronounce his name correctly.
Yeah, it's a 100 to 120 year economic cycle, and boy, did I catch some flack about even talking about cycles in future circles. That.
You're in friendly territory. I'm a cycles theorist. Future doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. I mean,
absolutely.
It's there's a pattern to things. It's not the only thing to use. There's other, obviously, but it should be considered as, we're humans. There's a certain nature to things. Although in super shifts, we talk about, the age of intelligence. I mean, this is a different. We'll talk about AI in a minute, but that is a change from like, we're not the smartest people on the planet. What's the rate of change? What's the acceleration? What's the level of creative destruction and our ability to adapt, right? There's a lot that's different. Is this a new cycle, or is it a continuation of the previous ones, just at a different pace? Don't know, but if you abjectly reject cycles, I think that's to people's detriment, to not even understand, but I get what you're saying about the flack.
Yeah. So I'm sure some people declared me a heretic in the futures field, and you know what? I don't care. I just don't care.
So that's the way to. The futures are supposed to be the rebels, and it's when the gatekeepers start deciding who's the rebels and who's not. Then we have a different problem to talk about, which is probably for another conversation, another longer conversation. But I mentioned, what did you get right what did you think you kind of got? Because it extrapolated out and you went pretty far out on some things. What do you think is tracking well? Current landscape of politics and division and chaos, or or is that what seems to be on target or close?
Well, rather than just simply saying, what did I get right, I'd like to put this into the record, if you will, and that is,
Yeah, sure.
This isn't about what's right or wrong in terms of forecasts. This is a very complex, long-term, exploratory forecast of what might happen, what is quite possible based on historical trends. The timeline itself goes back to 1750, the first one, all the way out to 2100. So just from a futures perspective, that's pretty ambitious.
Yes.
I mean, that's a long span of time, relatively short span of time in terms of human history, but from a futures perspective, my God, that's a long period of time. And data sets back, that far are sparse, but they're not non-existent. There is data out there that can be used, and I've tried to hunt down as much as possible. Getting back to the question of what did I get right about, the way I'd like to look at it is, okay, there are some things that seem to be on track that really need to have a closer examination. And that's the whole point of this chart, is to say, hey, this might be happening. It's worth taking a look at it in more detail. And I take a look at, for example, the social political aspect of things, armed conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that this one was published in 1998. I had tagged as increased probability of American involvement in a war starting in 2004, just based on the cycles. Anybody know what happened in 2001?
Oh,
we went to,
obviously.
Okay.
And then 2003 is really the big, Afghanistan started, but in Iraq, is 2003, right?
Yeah.
So.
But let's be generous in terms of the error in terms of the forecast. 2001 versus 2005. I missed it by 3 years. Does that invalidate the forecast? You could argue, and I'm not going to argue it, because the point is 2001, 2004 doesn't matter. What we really need to be looking at is, what the heck is this increased probability of American war? Well, if you take a look at this chart, the band goes out to 25, 26, 27, 28. 28 is still increased probability of American involvement in a war. Is that forecast accurate?
We've been in what you could consider almost for like forever wars, right? Or the
20 years.
Conflicts are good for business.
25, going on 25 years of war.
All right. Well, when you look at something like Strauss and Howe, right, generational cycle, and you've got we're in the winter, the fourth turning, which they've roughly said started around 2008 with the crisis, financial crisis. But yeah, they don't put it on the exact years, but yeah, it's a good 2025. So they're like around 2028 to 2030 that things would kind of culminate, end, and set for a new trajectory for, like, in their vernacular, the spring, right? So yeah, it tracks absolutely.
Yeah. But let me give you another one that I find pretty interesting. In the social set of bands, I've got human rights, slavery, feminism, and religion, morality, and philosophy tracks. And in the religion, morality, and philosophy track, I've got 1980s to 2000s moral majority has rapid growth in an evangelical organization. Fundamental power peaks in 98, 99. Was that right or wrong? We can debate. And I'm not tied to that exact time frame. But if you take a look at what's happening with church membership, for example, it's at historic lows based on the last data that I saw. Active membership in churches. A number of churches are going out of business, basically, because of declining memberships. Is that something that is, indicates we're seeing a shift in religious, spiritual perspectives? And it looks like there's something happening. That ought to be a key for somebody to say, okay, here's what this forecast from 1998 was looking at. There are some indications that at least part of this might be happening. We ought to dig more deeply into this. And again, I could have done that if I didn't get off into what I'm doing now, but somebody else can also do it because I don't want to keep flogging this.
I think there's I think there's an opportunity to bring that out. What I would love to do as we're going to kind of wrap things up is, where do you see, and it's I think for us, like we talked, kind of tying it all together, with a story world, what do you think would help? What story world that, would help humanity make better decisions? What's the thing that people should, like, if they wanted to work on a story, like what should they do, like, right now? And what do they need to have? We'll talk about the skills, but what do you think, if you could create one, what would you kind of set the course for people to?
My vision that I've had for a while is basically a storytelling platform that has a futures orientation where people have a framework for building stories. And, part of what I've spent a good 15 years with now is understanding how to build story frameworks, how to make it easier so the layperson can do it. So let's assume we've got a platform that makes it easy for people to tell stories. And they're quality stories in that other people are going to want to read them. I mean, you can write stories all day long, but if nobody's going to read them, what's the point? So they need to be at a level of quality. This platform would bring together people in North America, South America, Africa, and so on, and say, hey, in my story world, South Africa, Cape Town is facing chronic water shortages.
Okay.
You, as a resident of that area, what does that mean for a character that you create if you can't get water for weeks on end? Somebody living on the Gulf Coast of Texas, you've got what happens if you've got 3 super hurricanes coming in one season. What's that do to your life? What does that do to your character's life?
Sure. Those are great.
And if you start to be able to pull those together, you get a whole collection of stories around what's this going to look like for our collective futures. So I know what it's going to look like if I live in Houston. I know what it's going to look like, at least based on these stories, what it looks like in Cape Town. What's that mean to us, all of us? When this is happening there, this is happening there. And we're starting to be able to talk about that. I mean, climate change has been an issue that I first encountered as a reporter back in 1980. It was identified then as an issue. Have we changed anything? We got lots of great words, but it's hotter than ever where I'm sitting right now in Western New York.
Yeah, in the 70s, there was an issue. It was about global cooling. And then it was global warming. We also had the ozone layer, which we actually dealt with in the 80s, which is amazing. But then things moved to like shifts back and forth to climate change. So the climate is always changing. It's a question of what's the impact, and you're right in that way. It's kind of a thing for the listeners to kind of the debate about. But what I was going is, so for, people that want to dive into your work, and I want to have you back on, we can unpack so many more of these things. People where to find your work, your research, learn more about the story worlds. Hey, what's the best place to find you?
Well, if you Google my name, it's all over the web at various places.
You have a very specific name. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, there are a few von Stackelbergs in the extended family, and there is one other Peter von Stackelberg that has like 1 or 2 entries online, but you're probably not going to miss me if you look for, Peter von Stackelberg and storytelling or whatever. I also have published a bunch of stuff on ResearchGate it's a great platform for researchers, but it's also something pretty much anybody can get onto. And the idea of me putting stuff up there is I can actually, and I have uploaded PDFs of articles, of timelines, of stuff like that, so that people can actually get the material in their hands, printed out. I will put a couple of links in there in the show notes so you can check it out down below. But Peter, I just want to say thank you. You're just an amazing futurist.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the show. Now, about that thing I mentioned earlier about the book Super Shifts. Imagine having a playbook to navigate what's coming next. That's exactly why I wrote Super Shifts, to help you understand and prepare the seismic changes shaping our world. Don't just react. Get ahead. Super Shifts is available now, wherever you get your books. And if you order today, you'll get exclusive bonus content. Head to supershiftsbook.com and grab your copy now and start future-proofing your life. The future won't wait. Why should you?